Understanding the roots of witchcraft, it's really useful to go all the way back to Genesis 3 with the fall of man, because this is where we see the root of all sin, of course, but I think that there's some really good insights in understanding witchcraft that we can find in here as well. The serpent said to the woman, "You surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eye, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. And she also gave it to her husband with her, and he ate. Now, this lie that Satan gave is at the root of all of the deception in this world. Satan is trying to convince Eve that she is not already made in the image and likeness of God, and that she needs to eat this fruit and gain the knowledge of good and evil in order to become awakened and become like God, knowing the knowledge of good and evil. Having your eyes be opened, that sounds a lot like New Age phrases. Like, this is like the New Age doctrine, the witchcraft doctrine, just being given to humanity for the first time. And inside of this, when Adam and Eve were in the garden with God, they were trusting the way that God had set everything up. They were in submission to him, they were walking with him, and they trusted him. And the thing is that God gives them a choice to trust God's definition of good and evil, or to decide that for themselves and eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And this is really at the root of what happens when we, instead of, making God in his right place and us in our right place, we try to become our own God by, partaking in that knowledge of good and evil and trying to make up our own definition of what is good and what is evil for ourselves. And in that rebellion, we step out of submission to the Lord and we step into not trusting him and trying to trust ourselves, trying to make ourselves our own God, to have an idea and have a grip over reality, to feel like we have some sort of control over what's going on. And, not trusting God's definition of good and evil, that causes us to think, oh, well, I'm going to figure that out for myself. I'm going to have judgment over the way that God decided to do things. How often do we see that in today's world where we're like, oh, well, I don't like the way that God set this up, and so I'm just not going to believe in him. I'm going to believe in my own definition of right and wrong and create my own constructs for reality, my own spirituality, my own, doctrines to believe in, my own morality to follow. And this is at the seed of all witchcraft, because we fall out of trusting in God. And so we rebel against his definition of right and wrong. We partake in the knowledge of good and evil. We eat that forbidden fruit, and we try to make up our own definitions for these things for ourselves. And through that lack of trust in God, it sets up this whole thing where rather than trusting in him and believing in him, we can fall into this whole other thing where we want to create our own constructs of those things. And through that, we're trying to have a grip on reality. We're trying to have control over reality. That's where, the control and manipulation in witchcraft really comes from as well, is we're trying to feel like we have a sense of control over our lives, over what's happening in this world. We want to have the sovereignty, but the truth is that God has sovereignty over all of this. He has a plan for all of it, and his plan is good, and he knows way better than we do. But when we try to partake in that fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we try to set up those definitions for ourselves. And through that, we're really just trying to have a sense of control over our lives, because we're not trusting God. We're not trusting God and his plan and his goodness and his sovereignty over everything that's happening. And we're trying to, manipulate reality through the means of witchcraft to have a sense of control over our lives. Now, this can look like so many different things. I mean, this can come from straight up occultic rituals and witchcraft, astrology, divination. We're trying to extract knowledge from the spiritual realm illegally to get information so that we can have some sort of sense of control over our lives, how we've been created, who we are, what's going to happen in our lives. You know, we pull these tarot cards, we talk to spirit guides, we talk to psychic mediums, we do all of this different stuff to try and get information about the future or about what's going on right now so that we can have a sense of control over our lives. So it can be really overt in senses like that, like straight up occultism. It's all coming from the sense of trying to have control over our lives because we're not trusting God's plan. We're trying to take matters into our own plan, into our own hands, and make our own plan for our lives, make our own way forward. This can also just show up in very subtle ways. Like, you know, people talk about the Jezebel spirit a lot. There's subtle ways of manipulation that we can have a sense of control over our lives. So even something as simple as gossiping or manipulating a partner or a friend, or, you know, lying about something in order to get what you want or to have control over a situation. All of these things are also witchcraft. So it's not just, you know, the scary rituals and the tarot cards and the astrology and the candle burning and all of that sort of stuff that you see. That is definitely a huge, huge problem. But it's also important to be aware of, like, the root of the issue is not trusting in God and trying to take matters into your own hands to make your own definition of what's right and wrong, trying to come up with your own idea of how reality should be made and how your life should look, and trying to take that into your own hands rather than submitting that to God and trusting in His plan for your life. And so search out your heart. Look for these things. Ask God to reveal these things to you so that you can be aware of where the spirit of witchcraft is coming into your life, because we all have this in one way or another. We all fall out of trust with God, and we try to put things into our own hands. We try to have our own judgment over situations, and this can lead to further sin and further temptation, because one sin just leads to more and more sin. So pray for God to reveal these things to you. Where is this happening in your personal life so that you can turn away from it?